Well, thank you all for joining us. We are here with two amazing authors that contributed to our oceans panel. And the first thing I'm going to do is just have you all introduce yourself. So, James, do you want to start us off with telling us who you are, where you are currently located, and the very first time you felt like you fell in love with the ocean?
Oh, great question. My name's James Bradley. I am a novelist and essayist and nonfiction writer. I have a book out at the moment called Deep Water, which is about the ocean. It's about trying to take the ocean and use it as a lens to kind of think about a whole series of questions about environment and history and colonialism and capitalism and how they all tie together and can kind of show us some other ways of thinking about the world and how we connect to it. Um, I'm in Sydney at the moment. In Australia, it's freezing cold and raining. It's been raining like crazy for weeks. Um, and look, I grew up in Glenelg, which won't mean anything to anyone here, I don't think, but I grew up on the beach in Adelaide in South Australia. We lived a couple of streets back from the beach, so the beach was always there in my life. Like from when I was a very small kid, I spent huge amounts of time there. And snorkeling, swimming, and in fact sailing. I had a friend around the corner who had a yacht, and we used to go sailing in that, like a little laser yacht. And so it was kind of always there. I'm not sure there was a moment where I went, this is the thing for me. It was just always part of my life right from the beginning.
Oh, that's wonderful, James. Dr. Ocean, would you also introduce yourself? Tell me where you are located and tell me the first time you fell in love with the ocean.
Yeah. So Jeanette Davis here, also go by Dr. Ocean. I am a marine microbiologist, which is a really fancy way of saying I study the small things in the ocean that you can't see without a microscope. And I am also a children's science book author. And I am currently a professor at Hampton University, located in the US, in Hampton, Virginia. And I'm currently located there on the East Coast of the United States of America. When I fell in love with the ocean, I grew up knowing the ocean. I grew up in Delaware, which happens to be the first state of the US, surrounded by beaches. So I was always familiar with the ocean. But it wasn't until I went off to college and in undergrad at Hampton University, where I'm currently a professor. And it is uniquely situated on 204 acres of the Hampton River estuary. And the Marine Science Department is like surrounded by water. And I remember just kind of thinking to myself, I wanted to pursue science, but I didn't really know what science I wanted to pursue. And I went into the department, and that's when I really fell in love with the ocean, because I learned that to study the ocean is to study a variety of sciences. And as a science lover, it really made me appreciate the ocean even more and how much it's connected to life and humanity. So that's when I first fell in love with the ocean.
Oh, I love that. So, although I am not a panelist, I guess I could introduce myself so I'm not scolded by my editors. My name's Dani Hedlund, and I am the editor in chief and founder of Friction. And what we essentially do when we create issues is we find a topic that's really kind of bouncing around our zeitgeist. Maybe our students are really grumbling about it. The oceans issue was, in fact, a love letter to my chief of staff, who has two great loves in her life. She loves stories and she loves whales. And as a part of us constantly trying to make her happy, we decided we were going to delve into the ocean. And it's something that's really dear to my heart as well. I was raised by two avid fly fishermen, which told me that the water was the single most important thing to all of existence. And it's certainly something that's captured the imagination of so many beautiful works of fiction and nonfiction alike. And one thing that I'm really excited about this issue is that your two pieces talk about the ocean from two wildly different sides. We have light and we have sound. So I want to kind of dig a little bit into each of your pieces. James, would you tell us a little bit about your piece starting in Friction? I know it encapsulates the way in which sound is working in the ocean in so many ways, but what was kind of the heart behind that chapter?
So the chapter is trying to do a couple of things. One of the things I wanted to do was to think about the way that the ocean is, at some level, a kind of an environment made up by sound. I mean, if you live on the surface, if you live on land, we tend to, you can see a long way, but you can't hear very far. And in the ocean, that relationship is reversed. So, you know, you often can't see very far if you're down in the deep where it starts to get dark. You can't see very far at all. But sound travels huge distances in the ocean. And so it's an incredibly important medium of communication, of a whole range of kinds of communication, but also a kind of structuring presence. So the animals that live there, there's kind of sound moving through the ocean all the time. There is the sound of the waves hitting the shore, being refracted through the place. There is, the sound of the kind of wind kind of moving on the top. And there's actually, I mentioned in the book, there's this amazing recording you can hear where they put a microphone down on the bottom of Mariana Trench, so about 11 kilometers under the water, and you can hear all of these things from above. You can hear a typhoon kind of going across. You can hear ships moving. You can hear whales kind of crying in the distance, kind of echoing through this space. And so I wanted to think about the way that animals use it, that they use it to kind of communicate, the way it kind of binds that enormous space of the ocean together. But also that there are kind of other songs in the ocean. We think about whale songs and things, but one of the things I kind of wanted to write about is there's this extraordinary kind of oral history that exists, I mean, oral by sound, of one of the things we know about the slave ships, the ships that took people across from Africa to the Americas. One of the things we know about that is that the people on those ships sang. It's one of the things everyone talks about. And I wanted to think about this kind of sense that there was this lost language of song, kind of being carried across to the New World, and kind of what that meant, I guess, as a kind of way into that incredible violence and grief of that kind of experience. Because I think that then connects back to one of the other things I wanted to think about, which is this kind of idea of whale song and sound song, and the way that there are these different kinds of kind of violence happening in the ocean. So it's kind of I saw it sounds the kind of thing that tied a whole lot of things together in quite significant kinds of ways.
Oh, that's wonderful. And one thing I love about both of your pieces is not only the deep dive into what's happening inside this very dark world, but also how connected it is to the human experience. Dr. Ocean, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about your piece, but I loved how every layer is also like, how are the humans integrating with every single aspect of the ocean? So, can you tell us a little bit, for context? Dr. Ocean wrote the opener, so it's always the very first thing that our students and our readers alike get as an introduction to the new issue. So, please tell us about how that idea came about and how you explored it.
Yeah. So I first just like to echo, if you will, James around sound, and something that I'm always teaching to my students, as land-based or terrestrial beings. And we use several different ways of communicating, orally, touch, taste, by sight. But sight is the driving force, typically. But echoing what James said, when you get to the ocean, sound travels further than sight. But light is really important. Light is really important. And so for the opener, I wanted to focus on light in particular, and, shedding light on the beauty and the mystery of the ocean, and how a lot of organisms are driven by a light or the lack thereof. And so the center of that piece is really just illustrating how much mystery, how much unknown there is about the ocean, how much there is, just so much area of opportunity and exploration. And as we start at the top of the ocean, where we have more light that can penetrate, we are more familiar with the organisms there that are visible. And as you kind of get deeper into the ocean layer where there is less light, then organisms have this incredible way of being creative and finding ways to communicate and really sense their environment without light. And because I am a marine microbiologist, I always go to the microbes and I highlight that very clearly, where I talk about how organisms often, what we call them symbiotic relationships or beneficial relationships. They form these really beneficial relationships with small microscopic organisms that are able to generate their own light. And it's through this process called bioluminescence. And so it's light creating or biology creating their own light. And there has been so many incredible mysteries of the sea through bioluminescence and organisms being able to sense what's in their environment depending on other organisms lighting up their surroundings. And so I think the piece really does just illustrate how even in a dark place, light is important, and how organisms come together to form symbiotic relationships to collaborate and work together and navigate the deep unknown. And so many of those microbes that organisms there use for light or food or nutrition, we also use. In fact, most medicines that we use today, the chemical precursors usually come from somewhere in nature. And we're finding out more and more that it's not the bigger organisms that we see that are creating these interesting compounds for therapeutics. It's actually the small microbial things that you can't see. And with the ocean being the largest and oldest habitat on the planet, there's lots of room for exploration in terms of medicines and therapeutics, and so much more ways that we can learn from and kind of harness some of the benefits of the ocean overall. So that's what I sought to shed light on in the opening chapter.
Yeah, one thing I really love about that opener is not only the deep dive into the science and how it connects to the palpable things that we need as humans, but of course you also had this really incredible connection to what's in reality and how much it is sparked in sci-fi and fantasy. And I find that particularly fascinating coming from you, Dr. Ocean, because I know you are also a movie consultant on Black Panther Wakanda Forever. So can you talk to
Yes.
me a little about adding that, like how it kind of opens up the imagination of humans and you traced it through each of the layers? It was so interesting.
Yes, sure. So yeah, speaking of Black Panther Wakanda Forever, I highlighted that as well as other books and movies. Um, I often get the question, are there mermaids in the sea? Like, is there really something out there that we don't know about? And I have to tell people, I'm not too sure about mermaids, but oftentimes the alien-like creatures that you see in sci-fi and movies, all of them can be traced back to the ocean. And so certain features, again, because there is the absence of light. So you may see an organism that may have different features, wider features, or glowing bioluminescence. And all of those features and those characteristics, we can trace that back to actual organisms in the ocean. And so there's been so much literature, so many movies around what could life potentially be like under the ocean, and what are some of the cool and interesting things that we would see, or how could we, interact with those organisms more. And so I thought that it was a really great addition to kind of bring out all of the ways in which we watch films, we read books, and I will honestly say every alien-like creature that I've ever seen on a big TV screen, I can point to something directly that looks like that into the ocean. And so just being able to shed light on, hey, well, this concept of aliens, perhaps they are not in space, but if we want to be honest about some of the things that we see, we can find some of those alien-like creatures or looking creatures under the sea.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely love that. And it reminds me so much of the aspect of James's piece where it's what are the human things that we understand? Can we push that construct onto the way that sounds or songs or perhaps language is happening within everything from whales to dolphins? So James, I absolutely love that part of your piece. Could you just share a little bit more about kind of how the sounds are happening in this marine life and kind of what we hope it is and what it actually is?
Um, so on the subject of movies and the ocean, I was watching Star Trek Strange New Worlds the other night, and they had the Gorn on, and the Gorn are transparently a moray eel stuck on the top of something else. I kept looking, and every time you saw the head, you'd be like, "That's a moray eel." Um, Look, so one of the things I was writing about was whale song, and so one of the things, I mean, one of the things we all know is that whales of all kinds produce a lot of sound. Um, and there's a kind of division within whales. So there's two kinds of whales. There are baleen whales, which are things like humpback whales, blue whales, right whales, all of those kinds of ones that filter feed, basically. And then there is what they call toothed whales. So they are dolphins, orcas, sperm whales, all of the ones with teeth, basically. Um, they both use sound. They use it in very different ways. So baleen whales, almost all of them sing, um, and they produce these songs, which are on top of. I mean, they also make a lot of kind of social sounds. So like any animal, they do a lot of stuff with sound to kind of talk to each other. But they also have the phenomenon where they sing, and so humpbacks in particular sing these very long, very complex songs. And they have structure, they repeat, um, and and they're kind of tied up with kind of courtship and breeding. Exactly how is a little mysterious, but one of the things that's wonderful about it is that they change over time in lots of these species. So with humpbacks, they change a little bit all the time. The humpbacks play around with them, so they use the same song, but they kind of change the way different bits of it work, and so that's kind of used there. And then you have all of the toothed whales, which use sonar, and they use sound in a whole lot of really complex ways. And they use that for both sensory purposes. So they use sonar, a series of kind of sounds to kind of see with sound. And when you look at those whales, their brains have been completely reorganized. So their kind of hearing centers and their vision centers are kind of wired together. The sonar they use is incredibly accurate. I think with a dolphin, it can tell the difference of a thickness of about a fingernail from 20 meters away. When it looks at something, it can tell what a material is. It can look through things. So if you're a dolphin and it looks at a person, it's able to kind of see through us and see our internal structure, which is kind of amazing. And that kind of goes to all of those stories about dolphins kind of knowing when people are pregnant, people knowing when people are dead. There's an amazing story about dolphins turning up beside a boat when someone and behaving very strangely, and then they realize that there's someone down below who'd had a heart attack and died, and they had only just discovered this. Uh, but they also use it for communication. So with dolphins, there's a huge amount of kind of chatter that goes back and forth. Um, and it's very tempting for us to think that it's language. Its kind of status remains kind of mysterious. It doesn't seem to be language in the way that we understand it, but they definitely, dolphins have particular whistles they use for each other. They learn from their mothers, which are like names. They can learn words for things, sounds that they'll associate with various kinds of things. And there's a series of kind of studies going on at the moment about particularly trying to use artificial intelligence to kind of get large bodies of of dolphin and sperm whale vocalizations, and to try and identify the patterns within them, and then trying to map them onto particular kinds of behaviors and things, and to try and kind of work out what it is they're doing. And look, it is kind of fascinating. Like I think we really want them to be talking like us. Like, it seems language is so natural. We are so constructed by language as human beings that it's difficult for us to think about other forms of communication, which is not the kind of complex symbolic language that we have. But clearly these kind of systems of sound that dolphins use amongst themselves are in some kind of, they are somewhere, they're somewhere on a kind of spectrum with what we're doing. And there's fascinating stuff going on about trying to get out what it is exactly.
Yeah, there's a really poignant paragraph that you put in there about what's the possible reason for the songs. And it would be, very reductive to be like, oh, it's just for mating. But I really enjoyed you pulled that lens out to be like, if you went to a human and you were like, what does this music mean to you? Maybe you just find the vibe really great, or maybe the lyrics remind you of your hometown, or there's so many complex reasons that humans identify with something. And to say that it needs to be simplistic for marine life, I thought was just so poignant of a way to pull us out and say, okay, let's not put our human expectations on that. It was really well done.
Yeah, look, I think that's true about the song. I mean, I think there is this kind of, why do the whales sing? Why do the songs change? Why do they innovate? So with the humpback whales in the Pacific, you know, essentially songs move across the Pacific over time. So the whales learn new songs and they kind of spread. And it's a bit like, you know, the cool new song arrives on the radio and everyone's listening to it. Suddenly everyone's singing it. So these new songs kind of arrive. And I think there is something we do, which is about trying to reduce the behavior of animals to something functional. And obviously it has function. I mean, these things don't come about unless they have a kind of function. But lots of human behavior has a function, but then has meanings of various kinds for us. And I do think that when you're looking at creatures as beings, as kind of sophisticated, intelligent, kind of highly socialized as whales, it seems odd to me that we want to reduce the reasons they do things to something functional. It may well be that one of the reasons that, songs appeal to them, songs change, is that they kind of like them. Do you know what I mean? They find aesthetic enjoyment in them somehow in the same way that we do. I mean, and that's one of the things you see when you look at this, is that we tend to kind of silo humans off from the rest of animals. But, we're all just living creatures. There's enormous continuity between us. And I think once we kind of recognize that continuity, we recognize our connectedness to other animals, but also the ways in which we resemble and other animals resemble us, it shifts our sense of where we belong in the world. It becomes harder to say there are humans and then there's everything else. You're forced to kind of come back to this idea that, in fact, we're much more like all of those things than we often want to think, and that we are bonded to them and connected to them, and kind of part of the kind of web of life that they're part of.
Yeah, definitely. The first thing I wanted to ask is, you both have very keen scientific minds, obviously, but both of you have dedicated an enormous amount of your career to storytelling, to telling those stories in whether or not it's children's books or novels or incredible essays and nonfiction work. Why that, instead of just living inside a lab or with a scientific community? Why try to tell these stories?
That is a beautiful question. And I guess the best way of answering that is, I don't see any other way to be a scientist outside of storytelling. I think, we often talk about, diversity in science And I always say that diversity doesn't limit you to what you can see, features that you can or can't see. Um, it really is a choice. And for me as a scientist, I think it's important to be authentic to who I am, to my community. And I don't live a life without storytelling. So, how could I eliminate that from who I am? And so, to me, being my authentic self as a scientist includes storytelling, because storytelling is a part of humanity. And I don't remove humanity as a scientist. It's just who I am. I'm a human being and I live in community. I think, some of my work is around building community and using the tools of science to help build community. But all of that is a part of storytelling. And so I think it's a beautiful question. And I think that because scientists, for lots of different reasons, have kind of been these, people off to the side doing their thing, but we're humans and we're a part of humanity. And one way of building community is through storytelling. And so again, for me, I can't see myself as a scientist without it. It's something that I carry with me all the time. I think, and again, as someone in this field that embraces differences and variation of people and cultures and all of the things, I think that's the thing that I think storytelling keeps us um, connected. It brings about continuity. And because I've experienced so many different things in the field of science, I didn't want to be limited to one way of being. And I think storytelling is a great way of sharing my experiences, sharing the stories with others. And I think it's a way that people feel more seen and connected to the field. And so storytelling for me has come through children's literature, and giving young people the language to not just identify science, but to really identify how their everyday lives is already connected to science. But also making people feel seen in a way that, like, maybe you don't know a scientist. Maybe you've never seen what a scientist looks like. Maybe you don't live next to an ocean, but it doesn't mean that you're not connected to the ocean. And creating a story is one way that everyone can feel connected to something, even if they've never seen it or it's not as accessible. So I said a lot, but I guess storytelling is a part of who I am. So I know that a lot of scientists may move a bit differently, but for me, I can't see myself as an authentic scientist without living in the truth of storytelling, because it's a part of who I am and how I create community.
Well, that's great. James, do you agree?
That's beautiful. I don't really know what to add to that. So I'm not a scientist. I am you know, I'm a kind of writer who writes a bit about science. I I'm fascinated to write about science and always to talk to scientists because for a number of reasons. One is that I tend to find scientists really kind of inspiring. I mean, there's a kind of level at which their focus and kind of passion for what they do and kind of interest in what they do, I always find incredibly inspiring to be around. And it seems to me that as a writer, one of the things you're always trying to do is to take the kind of work that they're doing and take it to people and help them see that, to kind of share in that, but also to kind of connect it to some larger questions, So, I mean, I think one of the things that science can let us do is to kind of see larger connections in the world and to kind of one of the things you can do as a writer is kind of make some of those connections explicit to people to show them what they are, and also I think to take that work and kind of take it to a kind of wider audience. I mean, I always feel I always I feel a bit embarrassed like talking about science because I'm not really a scientist. I'm just someone who talks to scientists and then kind of explains what they've told me. Um, but I mean, there is something about the kind of beauty that when you talk about kind of storytelling, I mean, science is a kind of story. I mean, science is a kind of storytelling about the world. It is a way, storytelling is fundamentally a way for us to arrange and understand and make sense of the world. And science is one of our really powerful ways of doing that. But one of the things, and this is kind of what Jeanette was talking about, I think one of the things that's really important is that story be kind of integrated into communities, kind of built into our ways of understanding the world. And I do think that that's something that you're trying to do when you're writing about science. I mean, I'm just writing about stuff that I think is interesting as well. But I mean, yeah, I always love talking to scientists. I find them so fascinating. I find the things that they tell you so fascinating. I find watching them work really fascinating. Just the kind of, I mean, science is it's such an extraordinary kind of process. I mean, I also think that one of the things, I'll stop in 2 seconds, but I think if you're someone living as I do in Australia, one of the things that you are seeing at the moment is a kind of reshaping of what science is. So there is an increasing attempt to integrate and be respectful of indigenous understandings of the world, indigenous knowledge of various kinds, and of trying to bring not just that knowledge, but the people who hold that knowledge, many of whom are not scientists and are not trained as scientists, into that conversation and to kind of make them part of it. And there's something profoundly important, I think, about that, both about, at a kind of, at one level, about recognizing the sophistication of that understanding, but also about recognizing that to be done right, science has to be kind of integrated into communities, part of communities, kind of engaging the people who kind of inhabit those communities that it's about. And also I think recognizing that in those indigenous cultures, there is no distinction. There is a kind of continuity between, you know, story, and by that I mean story in its kind of deep cultural sense within those cultures, and knowledge. Like they are a continuous thing. They are not things that we divide apart. They are, the knowledge is held within the story, if that makes sense. And I think that's one of the things Jeanette was talking about as well. But I mean, in Australia, they're kind of watching that process happen. It enriches the science, it enriches the communities. It's a really, really powerful and important process.
I love that. It's also perfectly teed me up for my next question. Um, so friction is kind of unique in the way that not only does every single issue change pretty radically, and that means a subscriber base of thousands of people will maybe sign on because they're really obsessed with dreams or gods or bodies. And then little do they know they're going to learn about a lot of stuff that isn't that as their books come in the post. But also, it's carried across bookstores in the US and the UK, and it's also in over 1,000 prisons and jails. And we use it inside all of our teaching classrooms for under-resourced students. So often you're going to have your stories read by students who may have never seen the ocean, who may never have had an interest in it, and they're going to be exploring everything from wild sci-fi to cool comics to incredible scientific explorations. When we think of what you've written in this issue, what is one thing that you really hope a student who may have no understanding of the ocean at all would take away from it?
I would love them to take away a sense of the, I guess, of the kind of incredible beauty and wonder of that kind of sonic environment in the ocean. I mean, one of the things that I talk about in the piece is that, you get kind of dawn choruses of fish on reefs, and that kind of sense that one of the things that we see in the ocean is that if we learn to listen, there's incredible things to be learned, and kind of that sense of moving ourselves into a kind of attitude of care and attention will change, you know, not just the way we relate to the ocean, not just the way we relate to the world in, the kind of natural world, but actually the way we relate to each other, and, allow us to kind of see the diversity of experience, the kind of realities of history, all of those things. And there is something about, learning to listen to the ocean can help you learn to listen in a kind of broader sense. I think that's what I'd like them to take away from it.
Oh, I love that, James.
I think what I would like for them to take away is the sense of connection and curiosity there is in the ocean. I think that, it's the big blue, it's the extraordinary blue, and it's most of our planet. And I think that there is a lot of perception around it. For some, they're in awe. For some, it's really scary and a place that you shouldn't go. But throughout the piece, I wanted to make sure that there was some human connection. And I want people to walk away with um, not only is there life in the sea, but my life actually depends on the sea. And, of course, I'm biased. I always go to microbes, but I always say to people, every other breath you take, you can think the microbes of the sea. So something as simple, and I write about this, as simple as breathing, you can think the ocean. And maybe you're not next to one and you can't see it, but that's a connection that you depend on every moment of your life, right? You depend on it. So I hope that people take away that there's huge connection from, again, the food that I eat, um, the air that I breathe, the the transportation of my goods and services, that cross the sea, to things that I may read about or watch on television, or my overall sense of beauty, wonder, and mental health state. It's all connected. And so I hope that people feel connected. And because of that, learn to be more curious. And there's a lot of data that supports when people care about something more, they are more likely to take, helpful actions towards, certain behaviors that may benefit themselves in the ocean. So yeah, I hope that people feel connected and curious and lean into that curiosity around the ocean.
Oh, I love that. And both your pieces definitely made me so much more curious. The amount of research I did when Helen tossed them over, I was like, oh man, I thought I was a nerd, but they're nerds in a way that I wasn't. I'm so into it. So the last thing I kind of want to ask is, you guys are busy, and I'm assuming you're doing busy, cool things. Tell me what projects you're working on. What can we plug? What can we get people excited about? What's keeping you up at night and putting fire in your belly?
I mean, the ocean keeps me fired up generally. I mentioned before, I'm currently a professor, and I have a incredible tool that I'm excited about that I use often in the ocean. It's called environmental DNA, or eDNA. And similar to, crime scene investigations, or CSI, where a detective goes on a crime scene in hopes of finding a suspect, blood or hair, or their DNA that they left behind. I look at the DNA that organisms in the ocean leave behind. It's a really powerful tool because it allows me to sample and figure out what's there, even if I never see it. Because going back to shedding light on the extraordinary blue, it doesn't travel that far. And so even if I can't see it because of the light, I get to observe what's there and make sense of this fascinating puzzle called the ocean. And so I'm doing a lot more of that in my research and in my lab. And then I'm always excited about writing children's literature. I have more books on the way. Science is everywhere. Science is for everyone is my first book. And I'm so excited about it because that is that motto in life, going back to storytelling. I believe science is everywhere and for everyone. It doesn't matter where you come from, what you look like, what degrees you have. I want to make science more accessible and available. And so my books are available. People can find them online or on my website. And so I'm excited about continuing to do research and continuing to tell stories. And I guess the last thing I'll plug is there's an upcoming ocean science meeting in Glasgow, Scotland. And I'm actually working with the uh, Glasgow's School of Art, where I'm getting together a group of young artists, students with scientists, and we are hosting this special workshop where scientists get to work with artists to talk about really complex issues and display some form of art. And we're looking to get that into certain galleries and different places in Scotland. So I'm excited again about using my technical expertise and working more with artists to tell the story of science.
Oh, I love that. Okay, James, do you have a book to show us? I'm very excited you went back to the mysterious bookshelf.
I'm excited to hear that you work with eDNA. I saw that they did it in Loch Ness and discovered that there was no monster.
Don't tell us that, James. I'm still living for that.
Yes.
Atlantis is somewhere in the Mediterranean, and it's
I've got a book out at the moment. I could show it to you if you like. I've got Deep Water, which is the one that is I don't know if I can make it come onto the camera because my photo I can't. There, I'll put it on me.
love it.
Which is out at the moment. Which is about the ocean, so it's relevant today. I've got a new novel which is out in the UK and Australia at the moment. I think it's out in the States in November, called Landfall. And I'm working on a new non-fiction book at the moment, which is it's environmental. It's not ocean, I have to say, but it's got some ocean adjacent stuff in it. But yes, and then I'm working on a whole range of projects at the moment. It's interesting at the moment, I think, being a kind of writer in this space because the work you're doing feels urgent. I'm sure Jeanette would say something similar. I think we're at a kind of moment where, there's a lot of things at stake and, there is a huge role about trying to increase kind of scientific literacy and to get people thinking about lots of these questions. So, I think that's one thing that's actually really kind of exciting, inspiring about being in this space at the moment is that the work feels really, really important. And that, that's a kind of, if the world was in a happier place, perhaps it wouldn't feel as important. But, there is something about feeling, and I suspect Jeanette would say something similar, that you're able to, you have the kind of privilege of working on things that feel, like they matter, which is great,
Yeah.
Did you say something similar, Jeanette?
Yeah, I was just seconding that. Yes, that's very true. I like to say that this moment is bittersweet. It's a lot happening, but an incredible opportunity. For every kind of negative thing that I see, I feel immense gratitude for the ability to actually storytell, to speak the truth. And I'm grateful for friction and outlets that allow for creativity around the truth, and audiences get to still get excited about the science that is. So, yeah.
Oh, thank you for saying that. And the last thing I wanted to do was actually thank the people that brought you into this space. I met James because Lev Grossman recommended him. If you haven't read Lev's work, he wrote The Magicians and The Bright Sword, and he's been one of my favorite humans for just years and years and such a good advocate to friction. And I love that randomly he was like, oh, oceans. I know a guy, he writes about that. I'm like, why? And then, of course, we have Dr. Ocean came to us from Nicola Garber, who is the deputy director of NOAA, which seemed like a more sensible way to get an ocean writer. But I love that Cola was just like, oh, yeah, I know so many good people. But this one also deeply cares about stories. And I was like, oh, so it was just this incredible moment of community coming together to bring together really great minds from all these different perspectives. So huge shout out to the amazing humans that love friction enough to bring us incredible authors. And thank you both so much for your time on this either morning or evening to chat with us about oceans. And thank you for your incredible contributions. I can't wait for thousands and thousands and thousands of young people to now become marine biologists or authors who talk to marine biologists and love every moment of it.